but I said something along the lines of, "Dear Nazis, Groypers, and anti-Semites, you are not welcome in the Republican Party and MAGA and conservatism, whatever. Like, we don't want you here. You need to get out." And then I addressed kind of the issue with their opposition to our involvement in Iran. And I mean, it just caused like the world to cave in, it felt like, because the Nazis, Groypers, and anti-Semites came out of the woodwork and attacked me, and of course twisted my words.
Hello, and welcome to the Will Spencer Podcast. This is a weekly interview show where I sit down and talk with authors, thought leaders, and influencers who help us understand our changing world. New episodes drop every week. My guest this week is Paul Brown. Paul is the founder and co-owner of Wasson Watch Company, which he started in 2018. He has a diverse background that spans from the Marine Corps and civil defense intelligence to financial compliance, politics, writing, abortion abolition, and of course, running a watch company. Most importantly, he is a follower of Jesus Christ, a husband, a father, and a Texan. Paul, welcome to the Will Spencer Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
You know, you and I met, I think, briefly at Fight Laugh Feast would have been Dallas about a year ago. And I've been so happy to see the success of your company since then, your growth on Twitter or X, and just the continued expansion of Christian entrepreneurship in reform circles. So congratulations on all your success.
Thank you. It's definitely been a wild ride, and it's really happened largely over the last year. So it's been interesting for me to experience as well, and to get to share that experience with others. It's a lot of fun.
So before we get into sort of the wildness of the ride, I actually was curious, what led you to start a watch company? What's the history of Wasson watches? What's behind the name? Like, where did all this come from, and how did you move into that field specifically?
Yeah, good question. So, I've always been very entrepreneurial. So I've always, had an interest in starting businesses, running businesses. I'd started a few side businesses over the years, that were like kind of partially for fun, partially to make a little bit of spare change. But in 2018 and leading up to 2018, I knew I was really interested in starting something bigger, something that I could move into full time. At the time, I was working in compliance in the financial industry. I was in anti-money laundering and know your customer work for a
Oh,
large
wow.
financial institution. And I was seeing a lot of different businesses. A lot of our customers were business customers. They were, anywhere from like mom and pops to mid-size to, massive $10 billion kind of companies. And I was getting a lot of ideas about businesses to start. And I knew, there's this, sorry, is there an issue? I see your hand.
No, I was just adjusting my microphone. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Um, so I knew that there were a lot of different kind of ways you could go. I could start something that is a purely financial decision, like I see an opportunity in a market and something I'm capable of delivering on. But my preference was to do something I was actually interested in, something that I liked. And I've always liked watches. And I started to learn about automatic watches, which, if you're not familiar with that, an automatic watch is also known as a self-wound watch or self-winding watch, is a watch that uses the movement of your wrist in order to power it. So it doesn't have batteries. It's similar to a watch you may be familiar with where you manually wind it, by turning the crown. But instead of just being able to wind it by turning the crown, there's a rotor in there that every time you move, that rotor moves, and that winds the watch. And so I had not been familiar with those for most of my life. Interestingly enough, it seems that most people in this day and age are not familiar with them, even though it's an old technology. And as I dove into that world, I found, there's this whole niche market for automatic watches, and especially for high-end Swiss automatic watches, though they can come from anywhere, right? They come from all over the world. And so I had a specific idea in mind for a watch that I wanted to buy, frankly. It was like I was looking for this watch and I just couldn't find it. I found a number of watches that were similar, but not exactly what I was looking for. And so I thought, you know what? I want to make this watch and I think I could make this into a business. And the name Wasson actually is my great grandfather's last name.
Well,
So I had a great grandfather named Harold Wasson. He was born in the late 1800s in Iowa, was a mining engineer. In World War I, he joined the army, went to France as a captain, um, came back, and then was a petroleum engineer, went all over Latin America buying land with oil on it to sell to governments and to large companies. So he had a very adventurous life, one that involved engineering, business, military, travel, entrepreneurship, all things that I felt, uh, you know, were kind of ideas or topics or themes that I wanted my brand to evoke, that I wanted baked into the brand. And since he's my great grandfather, there's a real story connection there, right? It's not just kind of a story I pulled out of a hat. I like the name Wasson, and so I went with Wasson Watch Company, and our logo looks kind of like a W, that's also a castle. And I wanted that for one. I think the castle evokes power, wealth, sort of an old school, old world vibe, which is the kind of thing that you want to evoke with a luxury brand. But also the castle is the insignia for the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, technically, I don't know what Harold Wasson did in the Army. We don't have those records, unfortunately. We just have his enlistment paperwork, but and no one thought to ask him after the war, like, "Hey, what did you do?" Sadly, so I don't know if he was in the Army Corps of Engineers, but I know he was an engineer and he was in the Army, and so that's just another kind of layer of meaning on the logo itself.
what an awesome story to tie a lot of the pieces together from your life and your family's legacy, and to sort of bring a bit of the past forward into the future in a way that, like, if only he could know. If only you said it was your great
Yeah,
grandfather, I believe, right?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it does. It's not like you come from a family history of watchmaking where he would have expected his
Yeah.
name somehow. It's like, no, I'm gonna bring my great grandfather back to life. Quite a long time after his death. That's a beautiful story.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. After I started it, you know, a lot of people don't know how long it can take to get a business off the ground. But I started in 2018. I spent 3 years in product development. So that's going from idea to idea on paper to prototypes, different rounds of prototypes. And one of the reasons it took so long is I worked for 2 years with a company that unfortunately just couldn't deliver according to the specifications I had. They're very helpful with the design, but in terms of getting the product that I wanted, we just couldn't do it. And so I had to make a real difficult decision about 2 years in, like either one, maybe I just need to quit because I can't what I thought I could do, it looks like I'm not able to do. I'm not able to get there. Or two, I could just lower my standards. I could say, well, I want this, but I'm just not able to achieve that. Let me go with this down here. And the third option was to just pivot and start from square one and figure out how to get where I was going along a different path. And so I ended up identifying some different companies to work with and transitioned to that. And it was about another year from moving over with them to getting my final prototype done. So July 2021, I had my final prototype, took another year to go to market. And so we've been selling since about the summer of 2022, just going on 3 years now.
Yeah, a lot of people have no idea how difficult it is to ship a product of any sort, whether it be software as a service or a physical product like a watch or just the sort of thing you'd buy off a shelf at a store. It's an incredible amount of effort that goes into manufacturing, envisioning, designing, prototyping, manufacturing, and then shipping, and then selling the things that we buy every day.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and as someone who has a background in writing, you realize you have a context for everything, right? Writing, typically there's an editorial process where the writer submits something, the editor looks at it, they either make changes or they recommend changes, send it back, make those changes, it goes back. It might go through a few rounds, but the changes that occur are relatively simple because it's, words on paper, right? But when you're talking about a product, like I have an idea in my head, I need to communicate that idea effectively to someone else who then needs to work with a team to turn that idea into a physical product. And the layers of complexity, there's way more things you can get wrong. It's not whereas on paper it's not really abstract. It's like this word says this, let's change it to that.
Hmm.
But you're describing ideas that are abstract, and then they come out physically, and it's not like you can just edit it in the same way you change words on paper. Like there's tooling, there's machining, there's all kinds of stuff that goes into it. And so it's been a learning experience for me without a background in manufacturing. But I have definitely an appreciation for product development and the ability to roll out products. People do crazy stuff, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I have a friend who is the co-founder of Field Company. They make cast iron pans, which you can buy on
Nice.
Amazon, but they're bought from their website. And it's just that it's a $100 plus cast iron pan, and I have one of them. And to talk with him about what he and his brother started the company, about coming up with the idea, about prototyping the pan, about foundries and shipping and marketing, and it's a mass, and it's a small company. It's not a
Yeah.
massive multinational corporation. It's a small company, but the amount that really goes into it to create a finished product that you're proud of is like, yes, this has my name on it, and I'm grateful that it has my name on it. It's exactly what I wanted it to be. It's a remarkable accomplishment, even if you never sell one watch. And praise God, you've sold
Yeah.
more than one watch, but there is something to
Yeah.
be said like, no, I shipped a product. I did the thing. And
Yeah.
the fruits are up to God, but to create something from nothing, from out of your own mind, and then to be able to wear it on your wrist is what was that feeling when you got the first finished one in the box, ready to go to market and be shipped from your website?
Man, it was a good feeling. It was I'm not a person that usually celebrates wildly, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
I'm a person who a lot of times I've seen like mountaintops or peaks, and I felt like, oh, if I make it there, it's gonna be the best. Like I used to run marathons, and I remember thinking like, if I ever run a marathon, I'm gonna get a 26.2 tattoo. And I ran a marathon, and I was like, oh. No, I'm not gonna get a tattoo about this. It
Yeah.
is just this feels too normal, right? There's all these other things, and so honestly, it wasn't like this great mountaintop experience, but it was very satisfying. And I think what was most satisfying about it was knowing that I'd chosen not to quit, and I'd chosen not to compromise. And
Mm.
I just before the very last iteration, I had like one last opportunity to compromise. I'd gotten the prototype back, and it was almost perfect, but the hand I felt that the hands, the minute hand, the hour hand, were just a hair too thin, and that the logo was a hair too small. And I mean, just a hair, right?
Yeah.
Just to where it was like the balance felt just slightly off to me. And when I had that prototype in hand, I took a week to really think about
Yeah.
it, and like, just is this really what I think about it? And before sending it back for one last iteration. And that was a hard decision because I was
Mhm.
excited to go. But at the end of the day, I think just having standards and maintaining them, it ends up being worthwhile in the long run.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I in a previous life I was a marketing manager, so I'd manage teams of designers to produce various creative products from websites to brochures and physical materials. And there's always that draft that comes back where it's like this could be good enough, but there is something that's off just by a hair. And like,
Mm,
I just can't let this out the door. And so we got to go
yeah,
around the merry-go-round one more time until we just fix
yeah,
this, just one click in this direction. I'm having
yes,
PTSD flashbacks, respectfully of that. But I mean, you have
yeah,
to do it, because if you
yeah.
if you push it out the door and you're looking at the physical thing on your wrist and it's bothering you, that is not the feeling you want to have.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah.
So maybe you can talk about one of those moments where you were tempted to quit, because you mentioned not compromising, and that's a feeling that I
Mhm.
think a lot of men are blessed to have. Like, no, I'm not compromising on this. But so many times in our life, in so many different ways, we get to a place where it's like, maybe I should just give this up entirely and pivot and go do something else. So can you talk about one of the moments where you were really tempted, where you really felt like,
Yeah.
maybe I should pack it in, or yeah, just
Well,
talk about that for a moment.
probably the most compelling one was the situation I mentioned earlier where I realized this first company wasn't able to get it done for us, right?
Yeah.
It was, and it was a really, that was that was so tempting because i- without some creativity, like there wasn't an apparent way out. There wasn't an
Mm.
apparent way around. I knew I was going to have to dig for it. I knew I was going to have to search for it, and there wasn't any guarantee I was going to get there either, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's also like this, um, man, maybe this idea, maybe I've just kind of dodged a bullet here because I only got so far with it. You know, at least I didn't invest more, and now's my chance to get out. And then another time was I wasn't really quite to that point where I was considering giving up, but I was starting to wonder if I was going to have to give up at some point leading up to October of last year. So the beginning of October is when my content on X really started to go, sort of viral or semi-viral, whatever you want to call it. And I started to get a lot
Yeah.
of traction, which started to lead to more sales. But
Hmm.
leading up to that moment, my sales were very slow. I mean,
Hmm.
just like in the first 9 months of 2024, our sales were so slow. We were basically just barely making ends meet month to month in terms of our expenses. And I started to realize, like, hey, the rate we're selling, if this continues, even if we do make ends meet for 3, 4, 5 years, however long it takes us to sell through our existing inventory, we're going to get to the end of that time period and we're going to have no money to show for it.
Yeah.
No money to do our next production run, no money for anything else. Like this isn't a business. This is a hobby,
Yeah.
and it was something that I was wanting to become a business. And so I was starting to ask myself those hard questions like, what do I do if sale doesn't increase? And if it doesn't increase soon, I mean, it's not going to matter how much it increases because we'll have spent all our money that we made for so long, right? There's going to have to be a period of growth. And I prayed about it a lot. That's really what it came down to is I didn't know the answer, but I prayed and I asked God for help. And I told God like I I don't I don't hear a booming voice from heaven saying do this or don't do that on the matter, but I told God I believe this is what you have for me to be doing. I believe that you've helped me to get to this point. I really felt like some of the success I had with the product development, with the design, even with the company name and things like that, that God had helped me to get to that point. And so I was just kind of asking God for help and asking God, hey, if this is gonna grow, if it's gonna be successful, I think it's gonna need to start that soon. And it was really
Mm.
sort of shortly after that that it did start to grow. And so, I mean, I can't really take much or any of the credit for it because at the end of the day, all good things are from God, and I really think God has given me a lot of help here.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely know. I know that feeling for sure. And it's funny because when you and I met at Fight Laugh Feast, I noticed that it was not long after that your social media really began to take off, and I'm happy to see, because I think at the time you had just like 7 or 8, maybe 10,000 followers on X, and then it just started
Yeah.
rocketing up from there, something like that. And so I was very happy to see that. It's like, oh, I sort of we crossed paths at a crossroads, I guess, in the history of your business.
Yeah, I was in the thick of it. That was because Fight Laugh Feast was right at the end of October, beginning of November. So I think it was like October 31st through November 2nd or something like
Yeah,
that.
for the
And
election.
my account had just started to grow at the beginning like literally on October 1st. I had this post that went sort of semi-viral, and I went from 800 followers. I had 800 followers in September to 5,000 like a few days into October. And
Wow.
then in the middle of October, Some pretty notable accounts, mostly peaceful memes, and Jesse Kelly both posted about me and about my watches, and I went from like 5,000 to just under 20,000,
Oh,
right? And so
20.
that's where we met at Fight Laugh Feast, and it just kept going up. And there were definitely some lulls here and there, but I mean, it's there's been a lot of traction, absolutely.
Now, how did you decide to market Wasson to the communities that you did? Because obviously you could have gone a bunch of different directions.
Yeah.
You could have tried to reach a bunch of different audiences. What made you decide on the audiences that you ultimately chose?
You know, I um I came to realize at some point that the identity of Wasson Watch Company is my identity. And I think
Mhm.
when you're trying to start a company, you're trying to figure out what the identity of your company is. And I just tried to stay true to myself and my beliefs, which in my case, my most defining belief is my belief in Jesus Christ as my Savior. As a Christian, and on top of that, I'm also conservative. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I'm patriotic. These are just sort of things about me,
You're
but I'm also very
patriotic?
outspoken. Yeah, yeah. Who knew, right?
Who
I
knew?
wish there was some kind of hint. Um,
Yeah. For those who are just listening,
yeah,
there's a giant American flag behind him.
yeah, just a wee bit patriotic.
Yeah.
Um, so a little bit of background. I've been involved with a movement known as the abortion abolition movement since 2018. And prior to that, I started doing what's called sidewalk counseling or sidewalk advocacy at abortion facilities. I started that in 2015. I also ran for U.S. Congress in 2016. And so, I mean, I've been very comfortable putting myself out there with bold stances in the face of opposition, in the midst of controversy. Like abortion is a controversial topic.
Hmm.
It's one that, obviously you have people on the other side. There's controversy in that, they disagree with it. But even people that are ostensibly on my side, or to some extent on my side, they agree that abortion is bad and stuff. A lot of people just aren't comfortable with the topic.
Yeah.
So I maybe have already had a propensity towards being outspoken, being bold in different things, but exercising that in the area of not just politics, but politics around abortion, it really desensitizes you. It really builds up if you go from thick skin to rhino skin, if you
Yeah.
will. And you kind of just expect to be attacked and you don't let it bother you. You don't ask the question typically, is this going to result in me being attacked? You ask the question, is this the right thing to do? And is it prudent? Which sometimes, there can be a gap between those two things. There can be this
Hmm.
is right, but it's not necessarily prudent. Um, but so from really kind of the very beginning, I was outspoken about my faith with the business. And what changed probably between, say, like beginning of 2024 and end of 2024 was just, I think, my ability to leverage the platform X effectively.
Yeah.
Because there is a learning curve on that platform and it takes time to build up traction. And some of the building traction is building relationships. You get
Hmm.
to sort of know people a little bit on X and you're commenting on their stuff and they're commenting on your stuff. And eventually you get enough of a core of a following and of trust and everything that you put something out there and enough people see it and they repost it and it sort of starts to snowball. Um, and so I think while my messaging was always bold, it was always openly Christian, it became sharpened and honed on X over the period of time that I was using it then.
Yeah, X is that's what I try to tell people is that X and YouTube are prestige platforms. A hundred
Yeah.
thousand followers on X is equivalent to 10 times as many on Instagram. 100,000 subscribers on YouTube is similar in many ways, and the reason why that's the case is that there's massive learning curves for both X and YouTube. in a way that isn't necessarily true in other ways. But if you can hack it through the jungle and pick up, the way the language works and how to write and how to post and all that, X, you can be wildly successful on both platforms. They're good for different things, but that
Yes.
success is unparalleled, particularly networking. I appreciate that you mentioned it's about meeting people. X is as a superior. You and I connected on X,
Yeah.
really, in many real ways, but it's a
Yeah.
superior platform for networking. Very, very powerful. So I can see how that fueled your company's growth and success in a big way.
Yeah, well, and just kind of another note on X is it really has become, in my opinion, the public square, the true public
Yeah.
square, and that it facilitates public conversation so well. And like an open public conversation, because it's not just a conversation between two parties that everyone can sort of watch. It's a conversation between all the parties in which all people can participate. And certainly there'll be more prominent parties involved based on follower count and things like that. Um, but I really appreciate that about it. And when I try to sort of replicate the same thing on other platforms, I mean, you can't. Like Facebook is nothing like it. Instagram is
Mm.
nothing like it. It doesn't facilitate sort of a public conversation in the same way, but it's got some dangers that come along with it.
Absolutely, it does, and it's funny that you started making a big impact on X at the time that you did, which would have been the second half of 2024, leading into the end of
Hmm.
24, and then now into 25. And so, as you say, that it's a public conversation, yes, and it's also I like it to think of it as gang warfare. Like
Yeah.
I think X is fundamentally gang warfare, where the gangs all know who's on their own gang, but you can't necessarily see the gangs, and they're
Yeah.
just warring with each other in dialogue and speech and language. And it's a shouting match as much as it is a public square based on dialogue.
Yeah, 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 I'd say gang warfare is a good way to describe it. I describe it as information warfare. You
Yeah.
know, it is a battlefield in which, yeah, different groups and parties are trying to gain the upper hand in how information is disseminated, how it's received, what people believe. And if you get on X and you're just kind of this unwitting, new person or whatever, you need to know that people are battling for your mind on
Yeah.
X. A lot of different people, a lot of different groups, and it's what's really fascinating and also sort of terrifying to me is X went it went through this crazy fast evolution from this closed off platform like many platforms were to this free speech platform that was almost like the shining example of the public square that we've been discussing. And then eventually the big entities who have a say so in things recognized what it was and started figuring out how to have an impact there, because for a while they were kind of lost. They didn't know how to have an impact on X, but they are
Hmm.
figuring it out through the leveraging of influencers and bots and foreign influence and all the rest.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to discussing all that with you because I definitely agree, and you and I have been on the battlefield in similar ways. I want you to drill into something that you said though, real quick. What exactly? So in kinetic warfare, there's all different kind of things that any military force is trying to achieve, from the destruction of hard targets, from the destruction of military forces to the capturing of territory and the securing of resources. But in information warfare, particularly on X, what is the target? What is the aim? What is
Yeah,
given that we're dealing with posts of say 280 or so characters largely? What
yeah.
is the thing that people are fighting over? What is the territory that is attempting to be claimed? What is the objective?
Absolutely. So it's our minds, right? It's the
Mhm.
mind of the individual and it's the collective mind. It's the minds of the people at large. And it could be over a whole bunch of topics. But in many cases you can sort of boil it down to there's almost this large scale battle being waged between, um, you could say, liberty and authoritarianism,
Hmm.
right? But that's maybe one of the things that's being fought. But we're going to talk about this more, I'm sure. But anti-Semitism is a big thing.
Yeah.
And within the topic of anti-Semitism, or really umbrella over anti-Semitism, you have fascism, you have communism, right? And fascism and communism are two sides of the same coin,
Yeah.
and they're pitted against each other, but they're very, very similar, right? And frankly, both of those camps are anti-Semitic. But it's about changing people's views by degrees, and it may not mean totally changing someone's mind from being, let's say, pro-Israel, pro-Jews, opposed to anti-Semitic, all the way to being anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, to being actually anti-Semitic. It's more like, hey, can I move this person who's over here just a couple of steps to where they don't feel comfortable voicing their support for Israel or for Jews or in opposition to anti-Semitism anymore, right? If I can do that, the I being the interested parties in this instance, then that's a win, right, for them. And the more people you can do that for, that's a win. And then you measure it on the larger scale. So I looked up the other day, Pew Research, what the attitudes of Americans towards Israel are, and they actually
Hmm.
did a poll on it in April of this year, and they compared it with numbers in 2022. So in 2022, 42% of Americans had an unfavorable view of Israel, and about 10% had a very unfavorable view of Israel. In
Okay.
just 3 years, coming to 2025, it's gone from 42% unfavorable to 53% have an
Oh, wow.
unfavorable view of Israel. So it jumped 11 points from being a minority to being a slight majority. Um, the group that is 10% saying they had a very unfavorable view of Israel, that jumped to 19%. So that nearly doubled, right? And so
Wow.
you see how moving the population in a point of view by degrees over time can have a big impact on a mass scale like that. I want to acknowledge that there can be inconsistencies in how questions are asked, or who your target audience are and everything like that, but assuming things are generally the same, like, those are shocking numbers. That is a shocking move in just 3 years.
Absolutely. Did now, real quick, did you figure all this out just over the course, we'll say, the past year? Is it something that you've kind of had to think your way through over the past several months, or is this something that you were always aware of going into X or Twitter?
I definitely knew that Twitter was an information warfare space going back a couple years. Um, the specific topic of anti-Semitism was less on my radar, but I definitely knew it was an information warfare space. And so when Elon Musk bought Twitter, which I want to say was in like October of 2022,
Hmm.
I could be remembering that incorrectly, but it was around then. Um, I realized, like, hey, this could theoretically be a free speech space again. I mean, part of the whole reason that Elon Musk purchased Twitter was because of the Babylon Bee, having their account shut down for free speech. And it's like, okay, well, if he's buying it for that, then that's a good sign. And so on my personal account, the main account that I use is my Wasson Watch, but I've got another account called Paul Brown TX, and that's an account I had started years and years ago. I just didn't use much because I'd been shadow banned on X for so long. Well, once I saw and started to hear, like, hey, this might be a real free speech space, I got on, and I was using X to talk a lot about abortion abolition. I was
Hmm.
using my account a ton for that. And I didn't get as much traction, in terms of like numbers as I've gotten with my Wasson Watch account. But I was learned that's really where I learned the platform, was using that, and I started getting to know people and building the relationships that I end up sort of transferring to Wasson Watch. But you could see the power of the information warfare space exemplified in the summer of last year. Really, it was spring of last year. Donald Trump was, of course, running for president again, and he one of the issues that he was honestly not doing great on was abortion. He was
Mhm.
signaling some really troubling kind of stances on abortion that were getting steadily worse as the spring progressed. And myself and others on X started to voice some really, I would say, heavy-handed, appropriately heavy-handed pushback to what he was saying. Um, and there was one particular day where Donald Trump said something along the lines that indicated that he was going to vote for the pro-abortion amendment in Florida, right? And a lot of us on X in that space went apoplectic. Like this is a line you cannot cross. You are going to lose our vote. And it's my belief, and a lot of people who kind of watch this space carefully, that caused him to take a step back in the messaging that he was delivering on that issue. And he came out and said no, he's not voting for the amendment, and he stopped making the kind of statements he'd been previously making on abortion. And so, like, not only is it an information warfare space, but it's an effective one. You
Uh-huh.
mobilize people who are passionate on an issue at large, it can have huge impacts, not only on public perception, but on specific policy outcomes because of the stakeholders who are also exposed to those ideas.
Hmm. Yeah, you can, if you use the platform well, or if you're part of a, say, an organization or a gang that's effective in pushing their messaging, you can actually move the needle, or at least appear to move the needle on some
Yes,
key battlefields.
for good or for bad.
That's right. That's right. So I'm glad you brought up the anti-Semitism issue, because I think that's something that, obviously I can speak a lot about and have. When did you first start noticing that beginning to crop up on the free speech platform? Because I remember when Elon bought X, and because I had a account back then, and it wasn't right away. It took a bit of
Mhm.
time.
Yeah, so I probably started to notice, and I noticed in stages, right? There, I had a kind of a longer period of maybe a more dim awareness, but that is kind of starting in April, May of this year, just sort of shot up. If you graph it, it's be like that,
Mm.
right? Um,
Hmm.
but
Oh.
I started to notice it around the time my business started to gain traction in October of last year. As I gained traction, I got more followers, I got more people commenting on my content. Um, and just every once in a while, people would say either blatant or veiled anti-Semitic things, or people were just asking questions, or people were, kind of pushing me to take a position. I might say something. A lot of my content is very uh, um, kind of specifically going after the left, going after communists or whatever, but I might make a post that says they, like they don't want you to know this, or they want you to do such and such. And people would respond with like, who's they? But like you could tell, you look at their account and they've got like an SS, you know, symbol in their profile picture. They've got these kind of clues, and you're like, okay, I think I know what this guy wants me to say. Um,
Yeah.
and so my policy for a while, for good 6, 7 months or whatever, when I started to notice this, was like, you know what? I'm not going to engage with these people. These people are fringe, and I don't want anything to do with this. I'm not anti-Semitic, but I feel like if I come out and they push me to, you know, be opposed to anti-Semitic, it's going to be this big thing, and all this stuff. And I think if I'm being fair to myself, I don't have to speak out on every single issue, right?
Hmm. True.
Technically, I've chosen to be bold in certain areas, but I don't have to. But then over time, I started to feel guilty about this, that I'm not speaking up into what I started to see growing as a problem. And something that, I don't know if you kind of plan to talk about this or get into this, but something that you noted, even some of my content, as maybe I was becoming desensitized to what was sort of a growing um, anti-Semitism and even an aesthetic of anti-Semitism, some people were looking at my content and starting to think that I was anti-Semitic, and that wasn't the message that I was trying to push across. Um, but but it definitely sowed confusion, which is not really what I'm about. And it was kind of a wake-up call that led to a couple of different posts on my part, one in May and then several in June. And well, what happened was in May, eh, I just came to this point where I realized one, I think there is some real anti-Semitism on this platform that needs to be addressed. I'm tired of people commenting on my stuff and trying to goad me into this, you know, anti-Semitic position. And two, I really want to clarify because some people are now questioning it wasn't just the Groypers and the Nazis who were needling me. Now it was folks on the other side were needling me but are you anti-Semitic? Kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I wanted to clarify. So in May, I just put out this post where I essentially said, "Hey guys, I don't hate Jews. Um, the Holocaust is real, and the numbers are real, and Hitler was evil, and the Nazis were evil. And if we disagree on this, like we're not going to agree. Like there's just you're not going to bring me over to that side." And that post did get some attention. It got some views, it got some negative comments. I lost some followers, but they were quickly made up within days, right? It didn't really, it was kind of a blip on the radar. And so it wasn't until June that the real big post came and kind of threw a real wrench in the system, so to speak.
Yeah, let's start with that. Let's start with that first post. I appreciate you calling out some of those themes because that was the anti-Semitism was a phenomenon that I've seen not just on X, but in men's circles online for I don't know 5-10 years, right? And so it's
Wow.
sort of like this underground. Yeah, in the masculinity movement that was called the Manosphere, it was a subject of conversation in private circles, and that's just the jokes that men would tell of all different sorts. And so, as the Manosphere came into reform circles in particular, which began 2021, 2020, 2021, 2022, and as that sort of started to happen, these Manosphere ideas came into the reform world and it started kind of bubbling up on X in places, and I recognized it for what it was. But again, like you, I had been desensitized to it from having been in that world. I recognized it for what it was, but it seemed to explode, particularly after the election in 2024. It was happening a lot during summer of 2024, but it was after the election. I thought it was just an expression of everyone's angst. Everyone's just like really worked up about this election. Is Trump are they gonna steal it from Trump again? Are we gonna have 4 more years of Biden? And so as soon as Trump won, I'm like, oh, maybe everyone's gonna breathe this big sigh of relief, and we're gonna just kind of go on with our lives as usual and get back to some of the 2016, 2017 first
Yeah.
Trump presidency vibes. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, it
Yeah.
ramped up even more to the point where, as you fast forward 6 or so months, 6, 7, 8 months to April, May of this year, it's dominating conversation. And
Oh
and I
yeah.
appreciate. Oh, I appreciate that you took a stance on it because as I was watching this take place, naturally I have my own story with it. As I was watching this take place, I was starting to get very concerned about not the men who were talking about it, but the men who were silent in the face of it. And so I
Yeah.
appreciate you kind of explaining your reasoning behind all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. Like I I want to encourage other people not to be silent on it, but I also, was silent on it for a good while, and so I recognize where people can come from, and I don't want to be too quick to vilify those who are silent on it, but I want to goad them too. I want to be like,
Yeah.
hey, like this is a growing problem, and there may come a point where like maybe you are a villain if you're being silent on it. And I say
Yeah.
that, trying to muster all the grace that I can, knowing, but like there, but for the grace of God go I. And there, but for the grace of God went I, like for a while, right? And so I want to be very clear about the evils of anti-Semitism, that it is this gross, disgusting, horrific evil. And I also, but at the same time, I want to build a bridge to people who may be in that or who may be flirting with that and go like, hey, just this is a gross, disgusting, horrific evil, but there is redemption. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to be identified by that. You can be identified in Christ. You can repent and you can come away from that and actually be someone who speaks up against it from experience in a way that will even have more weight.
Yes, I appreciate that, and I agree, and I equally want to build a bridge to men who are caught in communities where that is being expressed, and they came into that community or that group of friends or whatever, and it's all just fun and good times until they see it take a very dark turn, and like
Yeah.
this is not at all what I signed up for, and
Yeah.
they feel trapped, maybe by their own statements they've made in these group chats, or maybe just not wanting to draw attacks from friends or who knows, and they feel like they can't just quietly slink out the door as the lights come on and they discover what they're really in. I mean, you have to find your way out. Maybe you don't have to draw the sword and go to war, but like there
Yeah.
is a bridge, there is a way to exit from those communities. As my pastor put it really well, he said that a lot of guys wanted to go for a ride go for a ride in the car with the cool kids, and they didn't know that they'd be involved in a drive-by shooting. And so like
Yeah. Right.
I thought that was a great way of putting it. It's like, yeah, you didn't know what you
Yes.
signed up for, but you still got to jump out of the car. And I think there are
Yeah.
a lot of men that are trapped in that position.
Yeah. Yeah, and it something that really has been weighing on me as I kind of think about how to frame the conversation. Um, I put out a post the other day, really addressed to people who are in those chat groups and who are in those friend groups that are seeing this stuff and not speaking up about it. One of the things I really noted, going back a little bit, and we can discuss this more later. When things got really bad in June, I was being attacked by just mountains of people. I was,
Yeah.
it was a real effort, an organized effort probably to take me down at that point. Um, I I started kind of seeing some other players on the battlefield who were on my side, and I was, posting some of their content, and they were posting some of mine, and I got people reaching out to me saying like, "Oh, don't affiliate with those individuals. Like they're this or that. They're problems for these reasons." Um, but they weren't saying anything about anti-Semitism. These same people, they weren't coming out and saying like, "Hey, Paul's right about this," or yeah, we do need to counter those things. They weren't being anti-Semitic either, but they weren't speaking up about that. They just wanted to make sure I knew that I shouldn't be allying with these other folks. And it's like, man, there's this old saying in abortion abolition work that's true in other places as well. It's like, I like the way they're doing it more than the way you're not. And at
Hmm.
this point, I think it's undeniable. It is undeniable that there is a real fight for our minds and for our nation on this issue. And if you don't like the way certain parties are fighting that fight, your best way to fix it is to get involved, right?
Yep.
Come into the camp and let's talk about it and even maybe argue about it. Maybe even like strongly disagree about it. But if you're on the outside saying, "Hey, this guy or that guy or that guy is not disagreeing with anti-Semitism in the right way," but you're not taking a stance on it publicly, then I'm sorry, that just doesn't have as much weight for me. You may mean well, like I'm not calling those people my enemies or anything like that, but it's not going to change my approach at this juncture.
Oh, there are so many examples of those "hey brother" kind of emails or DMs where it's like warning you away, from don't get involved with these folks. So okay, you're silent, hiding in the background. Why should I listen to your guidance on this when there's a team actually taking this on, right? I love that you mentioned that, because a lot of what happens on X, maybe people know, maybe they don't know this, actually happens in DM groups. Like what
Yeah.
surfaces on the timeline is just a relatively small percentage of what's going on the platform. Maybe not necessarily in DM groups on X, but also on Telegram or Discord or Signal or whatever, where the coordination happens behind the scenes. Like what we're watching on X every day, even if you don't post a thing, what you're watching every day are in many ways coordinated plays that are done off the field and then brought
Yes.
onto the field. And that's what I mean about being gang warfare. Is
Yes.
we all it appears as if we're all just individual accounts interacting with each other, but that is not the case at all. And so
Mm-mm.
know that as you're walking onto the battlefield, that's not like it's not like a melee. It's not a battle royale in Fortnite. It's actually coordinated warfare. You just can't see
Yeah.
the coordination happening behind the
Yes.
scenes.
Yes, yes, and coordination is valuable. It can work well, and it can also work against you, right? When people start to see the coordination and you realize they're bad actors, you realize the level of determination you're dealing with, and you realize like, hey, now it's time to go all in for this and put up or shut up, so to speak.
Yeah. So let's talk about the big post that you made in June,
Yeah.
which I think is probably the one that I saw.
Yeah, so leading up to, I think the post was June 22nd, and leading up to that, if we all have 5-second memories now because of things like X and just our attention span's always like a racehorse. But but going back to that week, the big thing in the news was the potential at that point U.S. military intervention with Iran because of their
Mm-hmm.
nuclear program,
That's
right?
right.
And leading up to that, there were a lot of folks saying like we can't do this. This is going to lead to World War III. Very notably, Tucker Carlson, he said
Mhm.
it will almost certainly result in thousands of American deaths and will result in the loss of billions of dollars and untold lost lives of Americans on U.S. soil due to terrorist attacks. So I'm kind of still waiting for that stuff to happen, but so far it hasn't. But there were a lot of folks saying that. But what I noticed was really insidious for me is I noticed a very sharp, steep increase in anti-Semitic comments and people voicing their opposition to the Iran conflict couched in that anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish statements. There was a lot of people sharing memes or whatever that I'm not dying for Israel,
Mm-hmm.
of various kinds. Like I'm not dying for Israel. I noticed an account that has since been shut down because it was a Pakistani account apparently. It was called like Texas Patriot, and I was seeing his stuff on my platform all the time, just spouting off about Israel and about dying for Israel and not fighting Israel's wars. And I try to be very objective about things, and I have a background in intelligence. I've done a lot of work that has, been directly looking at Iran and their activities, both in the Marine Corps and in the Defense Intelligence Agency. And what's more, I've had an interest in foreign policy and foreign affairs my entire life, in warfare my entire life. Like one of my young childhood memories was watching Desert Storm unfold on television
Yep.
before me. I was like 5 years old when that happened, but it was a formative memory. My dad, I mentioned I was in the Marine Corps. My brother was in the Marine Corps. My dad was in the Marine Corps. My dad, one of his best friends with whom he went to officer candidate school for the Marine Corps, died in the 1983 Marine Corps barracks bombing in Beirut, which was
Oh
carried
wow.
out by Hezbollah, who was backed by Iran. So I know about Iran. I know that they hate America, that they are deadly to Americans, that they've been killing Americans as often as possible for decades. Thousands of Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan died as a direct result of Iran's support of insurgent groups in both those areas of operation. And so um, I recognize that Iran is a bad actor, that they're a malicious actor, and I also recognize that they're unstable in ways that most nations are not. Most people are not familiar with Shia eschatology, right?
Hmm.
The sort of end times belief of Shia Muslims. And so Iran is unique because it is the only real powerful Shia nation, right? Yemen's Shia, there's definitely some Shia populations in Iraq, but Iran is like Shia headquarters, if you will. And in Shia eschatology, they believe that there's this guy who's known as the 12th Mahdi or the 12th Imam, who's going to come. He's kind of their like Messiah figure. He's going to come in some end time and establish a global caliphate, a global era of peace and, global Islam, essentially. But what's going to lead to his arrival, to his appearance, is going to be a period of essentially terrible tribulation, death, war, etc. And
Oh.
so they don't only believe that that's going to happen, but there's a large segment of people in Iran who believe it's actually their responsibility to help make that happen faster. So people will kind of do this false dichotomy of like, why does North Korea get to have nukes and Iran doesn't? Blah blah blah. Okay, first of all, I don't want North Korea to have nukes. I
Right.
don't think anyone does except for North Korea. Um, but there's a big difference there in that Kim Jong-un, we can expect, is driven by sort of this normal incentive to live. If he pushes the button, we're going to turn North Korea into a lava field. Okay? Like, he knows that. There's no getting around that. So that gives him a good incentive not to push the button. Um,
Hmm.
the people in the leadership in Iran are not necessarily driven by the exact same incentive because they may be willing to die as martyrs or to take it upon their nation to die as martyrs in order to usher in the reign of the 12th Imam. And so not only do they hate
Wow.
America, not only do they have motives already to kill Americans, to kill, all kinds of non-Muslims, non-Shia for that matter. As a total aside, when I was in Iraq, what I was mainly paying attention to was Sunni and Shia terrorists killing each other, bombing mosques of the opposing sects. But they we know that they're unstable, that they have shown malicious intent, and that they could use those nukes. So we had very real reasons as a nation, aside from Israel, regardless of Israel, to counter Iran. And so I knew that all these arguments were essentially fabricated, and they were very, very heavily pushing on this anti-Israel narrative. So I know that's a long backstory, but I
No,
want
it's
to put
great.
you in the mindset of where I was coming from. I wasn't just this ideologue who had this like, go Israel, go America stance. I have a basis for these beliefs. And so I put out this post. It's funny, I've got the American flag behind me. I had a big picture of the American flag in this post too. But I said something along the lines of, Dear Nazis, Groypers, and anti-Semites, you are not welcome in the Republican Party and MAGA and conservatism, whatever. Like, we don't want you here. You need to get out. And then I addressed kind of the issue with their opposition to our involvement in Iran. And what was interesting about that post, as you'll note, is it was addressed to Nazis, Groypers, and anti-Semites. It wasn't addressed to anyone else. And I wasn't calling anyone who opposed U.S. intervention in Iran a Nazi or Groyper anti-Semite. I do believe there are some good actors who, in good faith, opposed our intervention there, like for legitimate reasons, reasons I would disagree with, but not anti-Semitic reasons. So I wasn't addressing them. I was addressing
Hmm.
the anti-Semites, and I mean, it just caused like the world to cave in, it felt like, because the Nazis, Groypers, and anti-Semites came out of the woodwork and attacked me, and of course twisted my words and started to push this narrative that I was calling anyone who didn't support the U.S. war with Iran a Nazi or a Groyper or an anti-Semite. And like people piled on. I usually get between one and maybe on a big week, like 3 or 4 million impressions on my content on X in a good week. And I got 11 million impressions that week,
Wow.
22,000 comments on my content, which, in a good week, maybe it's 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000, right? Not 22,000. And the overwhelming response was heavily negative. I mean, I got death threats, all of it, all of it. It was wild.
Yeah, I remember watching a lot of that go down, and to really see it's difficult to get the beast to surface fully in the open. It's very good at hiding. It's very good at cloaking its language. It's very good at moving in kind of secret. It is very real. It's very difficult to get the thing to pop out and to show the mass of its bulk in the entirety. And
Yeah.
when it happens, I mean, I think a lot of people, I've tried for a long time in various ways to let people know what a significant problem this is. Again, and I've said this multiple times on the show. I strongly encourage everyone to read the book Black Sun by Nicholas Goodrick Clark, and you will see the history of neo-Nazi anti-Semitism movements in the United States and Europe since the 1950s, and you will get a sense, as I did when I read the book, the massive scale of it. Like, people don't believe it. It's fringe. It's not a big deal. That's huge. And
Yeah.
so in your post, it surfaced fully, and I'm sure you got to see a lot of things that were quite shocking as the beast reveals itself in the open.
Yes. Yeah. I was surprised by both the volume of the criticism and the just the nature of it, how dark so
Yeah.
much of it was, how attacking, how quick people were to spin lies, and then how quickly those were disseminated as
Yep.
well. Like stuff that is still being said about me today that I can trace back to that week in June, where it started off, and it's like, man, it's insidious, it's evil, but there was also um, it's isolating,
Yep.
because don't get me wrong, there were definitely people who came to my side who were openly, helpful and openly, supportive, but there were a lot of folks who were silent, either because maybe they didn't see it, or maybe they, didn't feel the same way as me about it, or maybe they just didn't want the ire of the negative attention that I was receiving. And it was kind of like this reality moment of like, oh man, this is bad. This is real bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the part, and the multiple people have talked about this over the years. I'm sure you've probably seen them say it. Just what happens when you see people who you formerly thought were your friends, that you were close with them, maybe you'd even met in person, either turn on you or remain silent in the face of the attacks that you know that they're seeing. Like, one of the
Yeah,
ways that people get around in X is like, oh, bro, totally didn't see it. And that's completely valid. Sometimes you can have posts
yeah,
do millions of views and, your best friend doesn't see it. And who knows why the algorithm works that way. But to see
yeah,
friends turn on you, or, to counter signal, or just to remain silent in the face of it, it's a pretty shocking thing to experience.
for sure, for sure. So that represented a big turning point in my perspective, and
Uh-huh.
my perception. And it happened in parts because it was like, okay, I was starting to see the anti-Semitism. I started to address it in May. Not a lot came up from it. In June, when I addressed it more with maybe a sharper axe, if you will, um,
Uh-huh.
I, that's when I went from like, okay, this is bad, to this is an existential threat that I can't ignore at all. And what's more, it's something that I've spoken about a lot since then.
Uh-huh.
And I used this analogy with someone the other day. Sometimes it feels like, because my account, I do hard hitting stuff, but a lot of my stuff is kind of satirical. It's kind of lighthearted. It's kind of funny. It has been in the past. It feels like you're this fun, like Joker kind of a guy, and you're at this house, and you go into another room and you see a fire, and you come back and you tell everyone like, "Hey, there's a fire in the next room," and everyone's
Yeah.
like, "Okay, whatever, sure," and you like keep bringing it up because it's a big problem. Like, no, there's a fire in the other room. We really need to address this fire. And people just like, dude, you used to be so cool, man. Like, now all you talk about is this fire. And I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
like, yes, it's real. And so I want to be I want to talk about a wide range of important topics, and I want to be fun and be able to, make jokes and make people laugh and all this stuff. But I'm also like, we cannot ignore this fire, and
Yeah.
I can't ignore it in my conscience. Um, we all have to give an account, right?
Yep.
And I've my whole life, I mentioned I've always had a big interest in foreign affairs. I've I've been aware of genocide for most of my life. And it's always been one of those things, even as a young child, where I was like, how could this happen? How could people let this happen? How could people not do anything about it? Why didn't people do anything about it? And obviously, people have done things to try to prevent genocides historically, but I see this as a just an important point in time where the time to counter a potential genocide is now. Because
Oh,
frankly, if we get to the point where it starts, it's too late. It
yeah.
is too late. It is way too late. Certainly, you can and should resist a genocide at the point where it's starting, where it's beginning to start, if it's ongoing, but you're not going to stop it at that point.
Hmm.
Certainly not as an individual. What stops genocides is larger armed groups or the bad actors running out of steam or choosing not to follow that as a policy objective anymore. Um, so the
Hmm.
time to
You know,
stop it is now.
I agree. It's funny. As I've been looking at this for a while, I have heard people talking about genocide, about worries about it, and I've always been sort of like, I'm not really sure where the energy is really going to come from to create that in the United States. But as you were saying that, I just remembered that someone had posted the other day about mass formation psychosis. Maybe you remember that term from COVID, where it really doesn't take a whole lot of people to set off a chain reaction that suddenly crystallizes or catalyzes everyone's
Yeah.
perceptions that suddenly we're facing this threat. Like ultimately, why did COVID become a thing? I think it ultimately became a thing because of flight attendants and public school teachers and nurses freaking out about it, and that was enough to create a mass formation psychosis. That's my theory, 100% me,
Yeah,
that
right.
those are three kind of bureaucratic choke points for around American culture, and it sort of catalyzed, particularly through women, it catalyzed the American population as a whole. That's my theory, maybe for another time. But it
Yeah.
would, please jump in on that if you'd like.
Yeah, no, one of the scariest things so one of the reasons I've had sort of a my eye on international affairs is my dad's been involved in international missions my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So, he would travel to Sri Lanka or the Philippines or Bolivia or somewhere when I was very young, and I learn about these places. Most 3, 4, 5 year olds can't find Sri Lanka on a map, but I like, oh, that's where
True.
Sri Lanka is, and this is what's going on in Sri Lanka. Um, and I mean, he's traveled all over the world. He's done a lot of work in Africa. He's done work in Sudan, um, and Uganda and Kenya. And he went to Kenya shortly after the and I can't remember what year this was, but there was like a mini, very localized genocide that occurred in this one region he was at. That I can't remember what the numbers were, if it was 10,000 or tens of thousands of people were killed in this one small area. And my dad was there again just very shortly afterward, and he talked to people, like about what happened. And one thing he kept hearing from people is, we didn't believe that that could ever happen here, you know?
Mm.
And it's, if you've ever read Lord of the Flies, which, that's been required reading in a lot of schools over the years, so a lot of people have read it. The whole point, the whole premise of that book was countering the concept or the idea that barbarism was something that only, maybe specific people groups or specific segments of the population could fall into, right? One of the
Mm-hmm.
prevailing theories after World War II, and this was this, among, say, British society, for instance, the author of Lord of the Flies was British, was like, well, I mean, that could never happen in England, obviously. Like that
Well,
was a
obviously.
German thing. It's those Germans, in their Germanic ways or something. And he just illustrated how people devolve into terror, into evil, into sin, into barbarism under certain circumstances. And obviously, if you're Christian, you recognize all of us have that capacity. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Man is not basically good, um, so to speak. But a lot of us have trouble wrapping our minds around the capacity for violence, for mass violence that is inherent and individuals and in groups of individuals. I think most Americans really don't believe a genocide could happen here. Most Brits to this day probably don't believe a genocide could happen there. Where there are probably certain specific circumstances that would be required to lead to it, so I don't expect it to happen spontaneously tomorrow. But under the right circumstances, if we stay on this path that we seem to be on today, it could be a very realistic prospect in 10 years. And that, man, that is both terrifying and sobering. It's incredibly sobering.
Absolutely. Yeah, because maybe if the idea of a genocide didn't seem plausible to me, thinking about it in terms of a preference cascade or mass formation psychosis that took place during COVID, which we all watched not that long ago, that I could actually see happening. And that you talk about the shift of the American public toward the anti-Israel shift from
Yeah.
42% to 53%. And as the information warfare escalates on X, and now that it's escalated not even inside X, just on the platform, it's also outside, with Candace Owens and so many other influencers. Now, I think I would say the information warfare battlefield perspective on this issue comes into focus much more clearly. That there is actually the possibility. For some sort of mass violence, not out of like some underground communities that have been fomenting a plan,
Yeah.
like the Day of the Rope or whatever. I can't remember the name of that book right now. Not like that, but just where the American public gets sort of captured by this idea that just runs like wildfire through the population.
Yeah.
That I could actually see happening. Okay, that
Oh,
is
yeah.
definitely sobering and scary.
Yeah, and also like in my mind, as I think about the potential for something like that, I don't see it as a spontaneous uprising of the citizenry to carry it out. I see it as resulting in the capturing of our institutions, right? If we're 10 years out from our population being at that level, I mean, we're talking about then the rise of the 21st century American Hitler, right? That
Mm-hmm.
precedes it. That then you start to see people voting for people based on the perspective of like, well, they recognize the problem is the Jews, right? I mean, that's an important sort of prerequisite for taking office. If they don't recognize that, then I can't vote for them, and then it's just only a few steps removed from there. But we know there are already people thinking like that, that kind of that a basic prerequisite or requirement for them to be on the same page with people is to recognize that the Jews are the underlying problem, right? You just
Mm-hmm.
see that rhetoric all the time. All they have to do is spread that belief to a larger percentage of the population. If they do that, then they've effectively won, or they've set the stage so that they can win. And what has been the fundamental, I would say, kind of just world-changing shift in my mind is you go back a ways, and obviously you have the anti-Semitism that comes out of this sort of anti-Israel, pro-Palestine position that we often see, right? But that has historically, and by that I mean going back a few years or more, been resigned to the left. And
Mm-hmm.
so as long as the left was championing that position and it was the left exclusively, it wasn't the kind of thing that I ever thought was going to get that much traction, at least not on the right, because it's the left. And as long as the right,
Yeah.
we just hold our position and we, do the right thing, we're going to counter them. And if anything, especially because Trump won in 2024, it was like, we're winning and, we're going to hold off the left and we're going to be able to defeat these things. But but what was really terrifying is seeing these same talking points and same ideas begin to gain traction on the right, or what
Yeah.
is seen as the right, with, as you mentioned, Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, and tons of these influencers who are right leaning or right branded or whatever else, that are now saying the exact same things that the left has been saying about Israel and Palestine for years.
Yes, and that's the part that's shocking is that I had seen that process taking place in the underground of the internet through the Manosphere and 4chan and the Donald on Reddit and all of these all these various sub communities. I had seen that happening, and I always thought, this is my mistake. I always thought that men of virtue and rationality would be able to put brakes on their train, which is to say that they would be able to understand that, okay, I'm now exposing myself to bad ideas or fringe ideas, and I need to maintain a sense of skepticism around them and be as skeptical as what I'm seeing online as I would be from what I'm seeing from the New York Times or CNN or
Yeah.
whatever. But I have not seen that. I have consistently not seen that. In fact, I have seen men that should know better, that should be able to keep their minds and their rationalities and their passions in check, absolutely just rip the brakes off the train and start going maybe slowly at first, but at an accelerating pace, ever more into more radical ideas to the point where they become their character is no longer recognizable. They're not the
Yeah.
same guys 6 months, 9 months down the road they were that I met them. And so that was kind of what I was worried about was what had been happening with you when we talked about that image from American History X, is
Yeah.
that, that's what I had seen that so many times. I'm seeing it today. I could name names
Yeah.
of men that I'm watching it happen to. And I saw that happening to you, and I was quite sad about that. And so and so we chatted about that. And when you finally did your post, I was like, oh, praise God. Either it ultimately wasn't you being seduced by radical ideas and having to put brakes on your train. It was you clarifying the position that you had always held, which
Yeah.
is equally, if not more noble. But so many men never think to, like, okay, maybe I need to slow down, maybe I need to jump out of the car, maybe I need to turn the wheel and take a look at where I'm going. Men are just not doing that, and so many I would say firewalls that would
Hmm.
have ultimately at one point have protected men in particular from bad ideas have failed to the point
Yeah.
where these bad ideas and the passions that they inspire are now in flames up to some of the highest levels of politics and culture. And it's happened in a year. I'm baffled by it.
Yeah. Yeah. One I'm baffled by it as well, and I'm sad about it. But I'm
Yeah.
also, optimistic. I tend to be optimistic. One of the things that I don't just kind of have a propensity towards being bold. I have a very specific design in mind. I want to be bold in order to inspire others to be bold.
Mm.
So I've gotten to have some really rewarding experience in that, where, whether it just be on a specific topic or just across a wide range of topics, being bold in my faith, being bold in my beliefs, and seeing people go, you know what, like, I can do that too. If this watch company can be bold about truth, like, why not me? Either other business owners or individuals, even. We can speak the truth on controversial topics. We don't have to, let the we don't have to sort of live in this destiny we've created by the don't talk about religion or politics at the dinner table, which I I think is an absurd kind of construct. It's like, hey, there are people talking about politics and religion. The way we understand it as a society is by having these difficult conversations at the dinner table. But I digress. Um,
Mm.
you know, I hope that people see. I've taken a hit because of these perspectives. I mean, my follower account was going up as much as 1,000 or more per day in the
Wow.
middle of June. Like, I was on this growth streak, and you go in streaks, so it wasn't necessarily going to stay at that level forever. But I was increasing that. My sales were going great. I took a big hit in my sales, and I had a lot of pre-orders that were canceled
Yeah.
during that week and in the week or so afterwards as a direct result of the position I decided to take. And so for folks out there who are like, hey, you're going to take a hit if you take this position, for most people on X, it's not going to be a business hit. It's going to be a hit to their follower account, or it's going to be a
Huh.
hit to, like, the number of impressions and likes they get, whatever. It's basically an ego thing. what I encourage you is, just as there's no dollar amount that you can put on doing the right thing, there's no number of followers, there's no number of clicks or likes or shares or social capital that you can use to justify not doing the right thing. Um,
Amen.
I'm going to keep being bold, and I don't believe I'm going to lose my business because of this. I think that Wasson Watch is going to be successful and continue to be successful and grow over the next couple years. But if I do, it will have been worth it. It'll have been
Hmm.
absolutely worth it. Because at the end of the day, I can't take it to heaven with me, right? I
That's
know
right.
where my treasure is, and I would encourage all men to remember where your treasure is and to act accordingly.
Amen. Amen. I relate to that very much. Between July, leading up to July of 2024, my podcast was growing at a pretty reliable clip. I was comfortable with where my numbers were going. They were on an upward kind of hockey stick trajectory. And
Yeah.
since over the course of the past year, particularly between July and October, that turned sharply. Because it was
Yeah.
July and October that I not only started calling out a lot of the anti-Semitism, I also started calling out what would ultimately be labeled the woke right. And
Yeah.
those two things in particular appear to have angered what were once a large percentage of my listeners. YouTube has made up huge bit of that, which has been a big blessing. Maybe a conversation for another time, but like, yeah, like, bye guys, go listen to
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah.
It's I was ready to lay it all on the line and say if I need to lay down my platform as a result of this, well, guess what? I'm not. I'm going to speak the truth, and I'm going to speak for what's good and right and beautiful and
Yeah.
true. And if that cost me everyone I was listening to, then I must have been doing something wrong to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, right. It's like what was I doing? And again, in my case, I can probably point to some of the things that I was doing. What was I doing that like so many of my followers were so ready to unfollow me as a result of opposing anti-Semitism. But I'm glad you brought up the term woke right, because I think
Mm-hmm.
this is a really important term for our time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one, you know, we've talked about the dynamics between left and right a little bit. And one of the things that has shaped me is this kind of recognition that the left lies incessantly, right? That
Yeah.
that the left is not reliable, the left, you can't trust them. And so for a long time, the term woke right, up to 2 or 3 months ago, or even less possibly, I would have rejected the term woke right as just some made up leftist propaganda, right? That
Hmm.
because the left is always calls the right bigots and racists and Nazis, as because of my work in opposition to abortion, I've been called a Nazi hundreds, if not thousands of times, no
Yeah.
exaggeration, right?
Yeah.
For that stance. And so I was just like, I mean, it's made up, guys. Just they're just calling us that to get a rise out of us. And so I'd heard the term woke right. It wasn't really real to me until like midway through that week where I was getting, ganged up upon. And I not only saw just the depths of depravity in what people were saying to me, but it started to become really clear that the vast majority of those people are embedded in the right. Whether you
Yeah.
want to call them truly right-leaning or not, or truly conservative or not, you could have all kinds of debates around it, but they see themselves as on the right. And
Yep.
to a large extent, they're accepted by, if not leveraged by, many people on the right as well. And so that was that sort of aha moment of like, oh, there is a woke right. And it's very active and it's
Yeah.
growing. And that truth has only become more relevant and more clear to me over the last couple months as I've been continuing to stay engaged in this topic.
James Lindsay, if you're watching, I'm going to make a deposit in the James Lindsay was right jar.
Yes, absolutely, man. He's been banging this drum for a long time. And
Yeah.
what's really, you know, to me, what is really sad is, there are a lot of Christians out there who are afraid to talk about this. And James Lindsay is not, at least as of yet, a
Hmm.
professing Christian, and he's talking about this. And James Lindsay
Yeah.
is someone who he made enemies of the left years ago, All right. He attacked their sacred cows and he made enemies of them. And now he's got enemies on both sides. And
Hmm.
I cannot tell you how much I respect what he has done and what he is doing. It doesn't mean I agree with him on, every nuance of every topic or whatever, but he has moral courage, and
Hmm.
he is exemplifying a lot more moral courage than I'm seeing in a lot of Christians. And that, I mean, I don't say that to like be this angry kind of I'm not trying to nag people about this, but be inspired by that and have the moral courage to do the same.
Amen. Amen. And I agree. I've had a lot of people who were not happy about the fact that I interviewed him for like 3 or so hours on the podcast. And I was like, look, he was talking about, I'm interviewing him based on a series of 6 hours of lectures he gave in 2022. That's what we're talking about. This is a man with moral courage who's calling these things out. And I think he's worthy of talking to. And a lot of people, say, oh, they don't trust him or whatever. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, maybe he made enemies on the left because he called their stuff out, but a man who's good at calling out one set of problems should also be good at calling out another set of problems, and you can fight two front wars.
Oh
It's not
yeah.
like we have to pick sides in this way. I think as
Yeah.
Christians or people inspired by a Christian moral character, their enemies, there are ditches on both sides of the roads and on the road, and we can talk about both of them. And I think that there's a habit, I would say, of many Christian leaders today. They're happy to call out the sins on the left, but when it comes to the sins on the right, they're silent on it. It's almost like they don't
Yes.
exist. Like this no
The
enemies on the right thing.
Exactly. The woke right loves no enemies on the right, or the friend enemy distinction that they
Uh,
derived from Carl Schmitt, the Nazi political legal architect, so to speak. Yeah, I found that that's been a whole kind of rabbit trail I've gone down, is seeing how many, supposed conservatives, folks on the new right are willing to quote Schmidt or reference Carl Schmitt in their sort of political positioning of this friend enemy distinction. And
yeah,
they don't have to. That's the interesting thing. You could just describe the no enemies to the right position without invoking Carl Schmitt's name, but they choose to invoke his name. And to me,
that's
that's
right.
very telling. I
Yeah,
think it's a really in my opinion, it's a very obvious dog whistle that, like, yeah, I'm quoting a Nazi here. Maybe he wasn't the best Nazi, but he was a Nazi.
that's right. That's right. And it's so strange to me that so many men, they say things like, "Well, I've been called a Nazi so many times, I might as well become a Nazi." It's like, well, congratulations, then you're a Nazi.
Yeah,
Like how is that
yeah,
proving any point? All you've done, and this is what makes me so upset, is that so many men are proving right everything that feminism said about men for decades. That's what they're doing. Feminism said men are this, 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 and this, and so women need their independence from men in order so that they cannot be under the tyrannical rule of these men. And so men listen to that. It's like, okay, well, you know what? You've been calling me that, so now I'm going to be it. Well, congratulations, you just proved the left right, and that's
yeah,
the part that I don't understand. Why men can't seem to find. I think it's the inner moral courage, the moral strength, discipline, whatever word you want to use, to take a higher road and to say, I'm not going to become the monster that people call me, no matter how many times they call me that. I
yeah.
don't get it.
You know, I think some of it's satanic, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Satan wants to always drive people to sin.
Yeah.
And Satan, he's not God, but as far as our understanding of the universe and different entities it works, it's generally people's belief that Satan is maybe the highest creation of God. That so we should expect that Satan has a certain amount of intelligence, right? And that he watches human behavior, and you can see when society it no longer has momentum in one direction of sin, okay, what you
Hmm.
figure out what's on the other side of that and push that direction. I've been saying this for a while as we've seen a decrease in public acceptance of LGBTQ stuff, especially the trans stuff, we're starting to see some real pushback to that. And, I would point to like in 2024 during June, Pride Month, which I call Biblical Marriage Month, a lot of companies changed their logos to these, Pride logos or whatever. That didn't happen this
Nope.
year for the most part. The Major League Baseball changed it for one day, and they got attacked so much that they took it down in the same day. I mean,
Yeah.
but what I've been telling people is I've been seeing this, which is encouraging that, people are moving away from this, public move towards transing everything, is like, hey, what the companies are going to do is they're going to go back to the hyper sexualization of everything, of this like this heterosexual sexualization, and push us back that way, which frankly was the foundation of our move into the LGBTQ, right? Like
That's right.
you hollow out people's morals sexually and then you just push down and down until you get more and more and more depraved, which is how we've ended up where we are today. And it happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, after the sexual revolution in the 60s, right? So what do you see come right after Pride Month? You see Sydney Sweeney's jeans commercial, right?
Yeah.
You see this overt sexualization in order to make sales, and you know that the American Eagle ad campaign was successful enough that we're going to start to see way, way more companies jump onto that. And because humans, people lack discernment, we're just jumping on board like, oh yeah, this is showing the left what's up. Like, no, dude, like this is insidious. This is evil. They're leveraging your lust to try to get you to buy things, but more importantly, Satan is seeing how the tides are changing and he's using jujitsu. He's using his opponent's weight and movement against them. And it's like, okay, well, the homosexual stuff's not working. Back to the heterosexual. Hey, it's all sin, man. It's all
That's
sin,
right.
and we've got to be on our guard.
So I was gone for my wedding and for my honeymoon, and I deleted X off my phone for about 3 weeks just so I could
Nice.
be fully in the moment. Because what could possibly be happening on X that would be even close to the level of importance of a wedding and a honeymoon? So I came back to X, it was earlier this week, to find everyone talking about the Sydney Sweeney ad, which I haven't seen. I was like, what is everyone arguing about? Sydney Sweeney and Beyonce. I had to
Yeah.
ask Grok what was going on. So for those who haven't seen it, and I don't want to go look, can you describe what the Sydney Sweeney ad was? Like, as far as all I know is that she was wearing a pair of American Eagle jeans. It
Yeah.
said something about the play of pun between jeans and like blue jeans and genetics, and Sydney Sweeney being a woman of, we'll say, ample assets. Let's put it that way.
There's a series of ads, right? And so I think there's some videos and probably some photos and stuff. And I haven't gone looking for them, so I haven't seen them all, but I have seen some of them. And yeah, she's just dressed in an overtly sexual way that highlights some of her features, and
Is
it's
she
like Sydney
topless?
Sweeney has good genes. She's not topless. No, no,
Okay,
but I think
I
there's one where she has like a jean jacket and it's like, you know, pulled down like pretty low or whatever, that kind of thing.
cleavage. Okay,
It's
got it.
yeah, I'm not gonna go into too much detail describing it all, but it's
Yeah,
very clear like what the appeal of the commercials are.
yeah.
And I probably, since most folks didn't delete their X for 3 weeks like you, almost everyone who watches this will will have seen that will have seen these ads.
Happy to be an
they'll be
outsider.
familiar with them. And I'm grateful that I'm not seeing them every day, because there was like a week or two where it just seemed like they were just popping up every single day, in one way or another. And I think Babylon Bee did a great job of satirizing it. They said something along the lines of like, big companies go back to sexualizing women to sell crap, or something like that. And it's like that's what it is, man. But we have to, and I can't even remember how we got on this topic, but
Eh,
but I think it was something along the lines of, you're talking about the way that society shifts and movements shift and so on. But Satan wants to destroy us, and he wants to
yeah,
destroy us with our own sin. Like, people think Satan can make them do things. Satan's proven approach is to lie. He lied in the garden, right? He lied um, to Jesus in trying to tempt him. He's called the father of lies. Satan can't make you believe lies, but he can and he will tell you lies. And the purpose of those lies is to pull you into a trap of sin to destroy you. And
Hmm.
Satan wants to pull America into the trap of anti-Semitism. And he does that with lies about Israel and lies about Jews, lies about history, lies about what's going on today. And and he can't make anyone believe them. But if we're not on our guard, as in speaking about the collective we, our nation, we will believe them and we will fall into that trap, and it will be utterly destructive for us.
Why does Satan want to pull America into lies about anti Semitism?
Satan, well, several things. Satan hates the image of God, so he hates all mankind. When as soon as God identifies man as being made in his image, well, Satan hates God. So just as we are to love God with all our whole heart, soul, and might, we're to love our neighbor as ourself because man is made in God's image. That's why that's right under that same command. Satan is the inverse of that. He hates God with all his heart, soul, and might, and he hates mankind almost just as much. But Satan can't destroy God. What he
Hmm.
can do is work to bind up souls to bring them to dwell in the lake of fire with him for eternity. Not so he can have companionship, just so he can see them destroyed out of hate. And so not only does he hate all mankind, but he especially hates the Jews because they are God's chosen people, which is another theological conversation around dispensationalism and covenantal supersessionism, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but but there are people that God set aside, right, for his worship and for his glory and to proclaim him to the nations. And Satan hates that, just as he hates children. I think one of the reasons that human sacrifice is so prevalent in so many corrupt societies is because starting in Genesis 3:15, when God said that Satan would bruise the heel of the offspring of the woman, and his heel would bruise his head, right? The head of the serpent. Satan recognized who his enemy was. It was the offspring of the woman. All right, let's kill all the children through human sacrifice, through abortion,
Mm.
right? So, in the same way, Satan has identified this people group, the Jews, and he wants to destroy them, but he wants to destroy all of us. And he knows that, you know, again, this is my specific theological interpretation. I know there are those out there who disagree, but God said he'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So, if we're applying that promise to Israel, well, if America curses Israel, it's really not going to work out well for us in the long run.
That's right. Yeah, no, these eschatological issues are not things that I've explored deeply, but I understand definitely as a result of something that Spencer Smith, who's a guest I've had on my podcast a number of times, he's an independent fundamentalist Baptist preacher and documentary filmmaker, the Third Adam series, highly recommended. He said in one of his Twitter posts, he said that the end result of all conspiracy thinking is a hatred for the Jews. And having been in the conspiracy world from before I was a Christian, I thought that was very interesting because it's actually true. And so I've looked into that world and I see all the different ways that anti-Semitism pops up in the conspiracy world. And then there it is in the left. And then there it is in the Middle East. And then there it is here, here, here. And now here it is on the right. And it seems like so much of the world, not necessarily in a technical every human being on the planet sense, but so many different, we'll say, subcultures that reject Christ in various ways all end up hating the Jews. That
Yeah.
seems to be the consistent theme. And I had
Yes.
never really thought about that before. Like how interesting. And I
Yeah.
thought that took on a spiritual significance once those pieces clicked
Yeah.
into place.
Yeah. Well, and you look at how the Bible offers a really clear example of the same pattern in the book of Esther, right? You look at Haman. Haman ends up being the victim, I use that term loosely, of his own anti-Semitic conspiracies, right?
Hmm.
He sees Mordecai And Mordecai, because he's a Jew, refuses, and he's an observant Jew, and he refuses to bow to Haman in a way that Mordecai believed would result in an overexaltation of Haman in a way that would be kind of putting him on the level of God, putting him above humans. So Mordecai refuses to do that, and Haman sees this, doesn't like it, and has this just burning hatred for him that is not exclusive to Mordecai. He blames it on all the Jews, right? And he doesn't just go for like, I'm going to get Mordecai. He goes for, I'm going to kill all the Jews. Not just all the Jews here in my town or my country. I want to kill all the Jews in the known world is what
Mm.
he ends up going for, which is, essentially the Persian Empire at its extent at that time period. And what's interesting too is the pattern that we've seen play out through history. He follows through. It's gonna happen. It looks really bad for the Jews. God, in his divine mercy, rescues the Jews and then turns it around and turns it on the enemies of the Jews. And a lot of people will talk about, especially as they get into sort of crypto history or whatever, and they talk about Germany, and they say, well, a lot of people don't talk about what the Russians did to Germany after World War II and the atrocities that were committed there. And like, as a human being, it's not for me to take things into my hands and to, cause destruction and suffering and violence in a malicious nature. But in the same way that Haman and his allies were destroyed by the Jews, in the same way that God pronounced judgment on the nations that he used to judge Israel in the Old Testament. You see him talking about Babylon, the Assyrians, which he used to judge the northern kingdom, and then he judges them for it. He uses Babylon to judge Judah, and then he judges them for it. And
That's right.
Germany, perpetrates the Holocaust against the Jewish people. And you look at what happened to Germany after that, and you look at the
Hmm.
death and the mayhem and the destruction that took place. And I'm not justifying communists or communism or the Russians for doing that. What they did is evil. And they should be judged for the evil that they did.
Hmm.
But we
They
shouldn't
were.
be surprised when that happens to Germany, right? And we shouldn't be surprised that if anti-Semitism picks up in a meaningful way in America and grows and gets worse, that the exact same thing won't happen to us too.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you're saying that because last year I interviewed Dr. Mark Musser in his book, Nazi Ecology. And one of the things that became clear from this book, 550 pages, he wrote it like a textbook, took him 10 years. And the book is entirely about how the Nazis were informed by pagan nature worship. They were not Christian. They used Christian language early on in their campaign for power. But once they had achieved power, it became clear that they were very much rejected the biblical dominion mandate. That's what the book is about, and about how all throughout the 19th century, the 1800s, Germany, which had been blessed with the light of the Reformation, just started throwing all of its Christian heritage overboard
Yeah.
in various ways. And so it was that discarding of their Christian heritage that allowed for the rise of the Nazi attempt at empire.
Yeah.
And so the Nazi attempt at empire had a distinctly ethnic character to it. So
Hmm.
the Nazis viewed themselves as the superior race, particularly superior to the Slavic peoples, the Slavs to their east. Then this is all in Nazi ecology. They were going to conquer eastward because they wanted to turn Eastern Europe into their factory grounds, like we kind of use China today and Mexico and Pakistan. They wanted
Yeah.
Eastern Europe to be where they would keep all of their manufacturing so they could keep their lands pure. So they looked down
Yeah.
at the Slavic peoples as subhuman and the Russians as well. So when the Nazis invaded eastwards trying to conquer Russia, they were pillaging and raping and destroying and committing all these war crimes against the Russian people on an explicitly ethnic basis. It was
Yeah.
that they regarded these people as subhuman beneath them in an evolutionary Darwinistic kind of
Yeah.
sub-evolved kind of way. And so when Germany went ahead and lost the war, what happened? Well, you have the Red Army come through, and now, I could use graphic language for this, but I won't. But now, forever, the Slavic blood is forever now mixed with the proud German ethnic blood, right? That
Yeah.
through forcibly so.
Yeah.
That's judgment down to a genetic level, and that
Right.
doesn't make it right, that doesn't make it
Yeah.
good, that doesn't make it something to advocate for, but it is God's justice if we believe God is sovereign over all things. So
Yes.
I'm glad
And
to
he
hear you
is.
saying that Germany was judged, probably never to rise again, actually.
Yeah, 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 and and it's sad because Germany does have such a rich history
It
of
does.
Reformation, and there's so many things like I've not been to Germany except briefly on my way to and from Iraq. We stopped there for a couple hours at Ramstein, I believe, if I'm remembering right. But I mean, literally just got out of the plane in the airport, got back on and left, and I've learned a lot about Germany and their culture. There's so many lovely things about
Yeah,
Germany. But again, it's a shame that that's a part of their history. We don't have to make that a part of our history.
that's
And
right.
and in fact, we are obligated to do what we can to stop it. And so I think for us, kind of the next steps, for conservatives, for Christians, for people who see themselves on the right, is primarily like one, first and foremost, look after your own heart. Like have your heart to heart with God and be in prayer. And are you harboring some lies in your heart that could lead to hate, or already harboring some hate? But then let's hold our own accountable. Our family members, our friends, but other people around us who are conservative, who profess to be Christian, who are branded as being on the right. And let's reject these lies, this false, unbiblical position of no enemies to the right, of the friend-enemy
Right.
distinction, this idea that you can't criticize people on the right because of the rise of what's on the left. What is happening within the right now is making us as bad or worse than the left. There's
Amen.
no point in if you think that having these fights within the right is going to undermine our ability to fight the left, it's really irrelevant because we're becoming indistinguishable from the left through this apparent evil. And it's just not biblical, right? God says, Jesus said, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. God very clearly makes it clear to us in his word that we should be directly talking to our brothers about sin, and even gives us a whole process by which to do it. One that does end up with it being talked about publicly. So
Hmm.
we know what we should do. We have the tools to do it, and now we just need to do it. We can't sit back on our laurels and watch things unfold around us. We have to take action.
Particularly as men, we have to have
Yes.
courage to stand up to the bullies in our midst. Doesn't matter who you are, whether you think of yourself in that way. You don't have to adopt the identity as the man who stands up. But I think men are called to stand up and say, no, we won't participate in this, and sort of commit themselves to a higher moral order.
Yeah.
Because I hear a lot of guys, and I'm surprised it took me this long to make this joke. They talk about knowing what time it is,
Yeah.
right? And right, and but there is a degree where that's true. But ultimately, no matter what time it is, we still have eternity to think about. And if the things that you're doing because of what time it is means that you lose eternity, which a
Hmm.
lot of men seem to be on that path. I'm not one to judge hearts or eternal destinies. Who knows, right? But certainly to watch men's moral character change as they try to quote save the West because of what time it is, that seems to me to be a profoundly short-sighted mistake.
Yeah.
And I think more Christian men need to stand up and start saying these things.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what does the future look like for Wasson watches?
Well, we just I've had my watches on pre-order for several months. The next round of the Wasson automatic field watch, which I'm wearing one of the old ones, but I got my first box of them the other day, and so I've started shipping those out. The next round that were pre-ordered. We've got a few different models in the works. We've got a women's watch that we're working on that
Hmm.
I believe we'll have a prototype ready in the next week or two. As soon as I have those in hand, I'll got to evaluate them and see if they're ready or if they need more work. But once they're ready, I'll be, kind of publicly showing those. We're also working on a dive watch called the Dominion. It's named after Genesis 1:28, right? Where God tells man
Mm-hmm.
to be fruitful and multiply and to take dominion. So it's kind of based on that, and I'm excited about it from just a messaging perspective, but also just it's going to be an awesome watch, and it's going to be our first watch that's assembled in the United States. If you know much about manufacturing, it's difficult. There's a lot of
Yeah.
especially cost barriers, and there's also some talent barriers that we've lost some of our manufacturing capabilities in the U.S. But I really do want to manufacture in the US, and long term I want to bring more of my manufacturing here, but that'll be our first one that's assembled here. And so for on the watch front, those are the big things we have at least in the sort of near term developing. But beyond that, man, I'm gonna stay in this fight. Um, I'm hoping that this fire I referenced in the other room, that we can get it put out so that I'm not always having to talk about the fire that's going
Mm-hmm.
on, so to speak. But as long as it's going, I'm here for it. I'm not going to give it up.
What are some of the positive things that have come out of your experience of trying to wake people up to the fire?
Man, I've had a lot of people reach out who are Jewish or of Jewish descent, and also just for the casual listener out there, you know, Jew is typically people think of it and they don't know if you're talking about the religion or the ethnicity, but Jew is an ethnicity.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Christian Jews. There is a lot of atheist Jews, and of course there are Jews who follow Judaism. But so I've had a lot of Jews reach out and just express their gratitude I talked about feeling isolated. A lot of times they feel isolated as a people group, and they feel like they look around and they don't feel like they see a lot of allies. They kind of see the world closing in on them. And so it's been an opportunity for me um, to project the light of Christ on them, and to point them to Christ, and to share the gospel with some of them, or some of them who are believers, to encourage them, right, in our brotherhood in Christ. I've made some new friends, and I've met some people who I've gotten to witness their moral courage. Like I'd mentioned James Lindsay as someone who I would call a friend at this point. I didn't know anything about him before, but he's someone I'm honored to call a friend. You're someone I would call a friend that, we don't talk all the time or anything, but you're an ally that I see. You're out there across the battlefield, and it's like I do look forward to a time when in glorification, where there's no more death and no more pain, and Christ wipes every tear from our eyes. I look forward to that. But there's also something about being in the fight and knowing that you're fighting the good fight that's rewarding. And if this is like what God made me for, and the time that He made me for, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, then that's great. I can do that all day, as long as God will have me do it, and as long as I'm alive to do it. To live as Christ and to die as gain.
Sounds like you certainly didn't expect that this was the journey that starting a watch company would take you on.
Definitely not. Definitely not, man. Not even close. I could not have predicted this. The longer I live, the more things I've experienced in life, the more I know that I cannot predict what's coming, right? You
Mm-hmm.
look forward. There've been so many points in my life where I've stopped and I've looked back like 5 years prior and said like, no, I never would have seen myself here. And that only becomes more extreme in how true it is over time. So I don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now, man. I'm not even going to try to predict that.
Right. You make watches, not time machines.
Yes, so far.
So far. Sorry, I
Yeah.
couldn't resist. Well, Paul, I really appreciate your generosity of time, the generosity of telling this story, and of course, your courage, speaking up and being morally convicted about what you're seeing and saying something like, hey, I'm not with those guys. This is where I stand. And then riding out, what I can only imagine was a massive wave of hatred that I don't know that we're necessarily as people meant to endure, and yet endure it we must. So I thank you and congratulate you on that.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate you. I appreciate your courage and just you as an ally and for having me on the show. It's definitely been fun, and yeah, I look forward to people getting to check it out.
Definitely. So, where would you like to send people to find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, so two places, wassonwatch.com, Wasson watch.com. That's our website. You can buy our watches there and find out more about our company. And then on X, we've talked about X a lot. My Twitter handle on X is at Wasson Watch. Follow me there. That's where I'm definitely most active online. You can read about me on my website, but you can actually sort of witness what I'm saying and doing and thinking day to day on X.
Wonderful. I'll be sure to send people that way. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.